My family walled me off from my dying grandpa for days, until he left me everything. If you had looked at my family from the outside, you would have thought we were the picture of the year-loving household. But the truth is, my family was a den of wolves, and I was the designated black sheep. For as long as I can remember, my parents and my older brother, Austin, treated me like an outsider. Austin was the golden child. He was arrogant, lazy, and spent every dime my parents gave him on flashy clothes and sports cars. I, on the other hand, worked 2 jobs to put myself through college and never asked for a single handout. My parents constantly reminded me that I was a disappointment, while Austin could do no wrong. The only person in that entire toxic family who ever truly loved me was my grandfather. Grandpa was a self-made man. He had built a massive real estate empire from scratch, worth tens of millions of dollars. But despite his wealth, he lived modestly in his old estate and valued hard work above everything else. While my parents and Austin only visited Grandpa to beg for money or drop hints about his will, I visited him every single weekend just to spend time with him. We would sit on his porch, drink coffee, and talk for hours. He was my mentor, my protector, and my best friend. But 3 weeks ago, Grandpa's health took a sudden drastic turn for the worse. He suffered a severe stroke and was confined to his mansion under 24-hour hospice care. The doctors made it clear that he only had a few days left to live. The moment the news broke, my family shifted into predator mode. They didn't care that Grandpa was dying. They only cared about his money. They practically moved into his mansion, acting like grieving saints, but their real objective was to guard him and make sure nobody else could get close to him. Especially me. The nightmare began on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I had just finished my shift at work when Grandpa's primary hospice nurse, a kind woman named Clara, called me secretly. She whispered into the phone, "Chloe, you need to come to the estate right now. Your grandfather is losing consciousness and he keeps calling out your name. He wants to see you." My heart shattered. I dropped everything, hopped into my car, and drove like a maniac to Grandpa's estate. When I arrived, the wrought iron gates were locked. I had to buzz the intercom 3 times before the security guard, who looked incredibly uncomfortable, finally let me in. I sprinted up the marble steps of the mansion and pushed open the massive front doors. But I didn't even make it past the grand foyer. My mother and Austin were standing at the base of the staircase, blocking my path like prison guards. My mother had a handkerchief pressed to her dry eyes, pretending to cry, while Austin stood beside her with his arms crossed, a smug grin plastered on his face. "Stop right there, Chloe," my mother snapped, her voice instantly dropping the fake grieving tone and turning incredibly cold. "What are you doing here?" "I'm here to see Grandpa," I said, my voice shaking with anxiety. "Clara called me. She said he's asking for me. Please, let me go up." "Clara had no right to call you," Austin sneered, stepping forward to physically block the stairs. "Grandpa is resting. The doctor said absolutely no visitors. He needs peace and quiet, and frankly, your dramatic presence will only stress him out." "Austin, he is my grandfather too," I yelled, tears of frustration spilling down my cheeks. "He is dying. Let me say goodbye to him." My father walked out of the study at that moment, holding a glass of expensive whiskey. He looked at me with complete disgust. "That is enough, Chloe. Your brother is right. You have always been a dark cloud over this family. We are dealing with a tragedy, and we do not have the energy for your selfishness. Leave the house. Now." "Dad, please," I begged, moving toward the stairs. "Just 5 minutes. Let me just hold his hand." Before I could even touch the banister, Austin grabbed my arm violently and shoved me back. I stumbled, nearly falling onto the marble floor. "He doesn't want to see you, Chloe," Austin hissed, leaning in close so only I could hear. "He knows you're just here to beg for a piece of the inheritance. But guess what? There is nothing here for you. Go back to your miserable little apartment." My own mother watched her son put his hands on me and did absolutely nothing. She just turned her back and said, "Call security, Austin. If she doesn't leave, have her arrested for trespassing." I looked at my parents and my brother, utterly disgusted by their cruelty. They were literally walling me off from a dying man, isolating him in his final moments, just so they could control the narrative and secure his fortune. I knew that if I caused a massive scene, they would call the police, and I would spend Grandpa's final hours in a jail cell. "You are monsters," I whispered, my voice trembling with a mixture of intense grief and pure rage. "All of you." I turned around and walked out into the pouring rain, sobbing so hard I could barely see the road. For the next 3 days, my family completely locked me out. They blocked my number on Grandpa's house phone. They threatened the hospice staff, telling them they would be fired immediately if they leaked any information to me. I drove to the estate every single day, only to be turned away at the gate by security guards who told me they were just following orders from my father. I was trapped in a living hell, knowing my best friend was fading away in that massive lonely house, surrounded by vultures who didn't care about him. On Friday morning, the call finally came. It wasn't from my family. It was an automated notification from the hospital network. Grandfather had passed away at 6 in the morning. My family didn't even bother to text me. They left me to find out from a cold automated email. I sat on the floor of my apartment and cried until my chest ached. I felt completely broken, consumed by guilt that I wasn't there to hold his hand, and consumed by hatred for the people who shared my blood. But then, at noon, my phone rang again. This time, it was an unknown number. I answered it, my voice raw and cracked. "Hello? Is this Chloe Vance?" A sophisticated elderly voice asked. "Yes, this is Chloe," I replied. "My name is Arthur Pendleton, your grandfather's personal estate attorney," the man said, his tone incredibly grave yet oddly gentle. "I am deeply sorry for your loss, Chloe. Your grandfather was a great man. I am calling to inform you that the reading of his last will and testament will take place tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock at my downtown office." "Thank you, Mr. Pendleton," I whispered. "But honestly, my family made it very clear that I am not a part of this. I don't think I should come." There was a long pause on the other end of the line when Mr. Pendleton spoke again. His voice had a sharp, intense edge to it. "Chloe, your grandfather gave me very strict, specific instructions before he lost consciousness. He explicitly stated that the will cannot and will not be opened unless you are present in the room. Your family already knows this, and they are furious. I strongly advise you to be there." I blinked, wiping a tear from my eye. Grandpa had left instructions specifically for me? Slowly, the grief inside me began to morph into something else. A cold, calculating resolve. My family thought they had won. They thought that by walling me off from Grandpa, they had secured their kingdom. But they didn't know Grandpa as well as they thought they did. "I'll be there, Mr. Pendleton," I said firmly. "I will be there." The next morning, the rain had finally stopped, leaving the city air cold and crisp. I pulled up to the high-rise corporate building downtown where Mr. Pendleton's law firm was located. My heart was pounding against my ribs, but my mind was completely clear. When I walked into the grand conference room on the 40th floor, the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. My parents in Austin were already seated around a massive mahogany table. They were dressed in expensive, flashy black designer outfits, looking more like they were attending a high-fashion event than a meeting about their deceased patriarch. The moment I stepped through the door, all three of them glared at me with absolute hostility. "Look what dragged itself in," Austin sneered, leaning back in his leather chair and checking his gold watch. "You're 5 minutes late, Chloe. Some of us actually have important things to do today." "Sit down, Chloe, and don't make a scene," my father said, his voice dripping with condescension. "We only allowed you in this room because the attorney insisted on your presence for the formalities. Don't get any grand ideas. You're getting nothing." I didn't say a single word to them. I walked right past them, pulled out a chair at the far end of the table, and sat down. I looked directly at Mr. Pendleton, who was sitting at the head of the table, surrounded by thick legal documents and a laptop. "Thank you for coming, Chloe," Mr. Pendleton said, giving me a reassuring nod. He then turned his attention to my parents in Austin, his expression tightening into a serious, no-nonsense look. "Now that everyone is present, we can officially begin the reading of the last will and testament of Richard Vance." Austin smirked, leaning forward on his elbows. "Great, let's get this over with. We all know how this goes. Just read out the real estate distribution and the main bank accounts so we can sign the paperwork and leave." Mr. Pendleton didn't acknowledge Austin's arrogance. He adjusted his glasses, opened the main folder, and began to read in a clear, resonant voice. I, Richard Vance, being of sound mind, hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. To my son, Robert Vance, and his wife, Eleanor. Mr. Pendleton paused, looking over the top of his glasses at my parents. I leave the family beach house in Malibu, along with a one-time cash inheritance of $500,000. My mother's jaw dropped. She blinked in utter disbelief, her fake grieving facade completely slipping. Wait, what? 500,000? That's it? Richard's net worth is over $40 million. There must be a mistake. Eleanor, let him finish, my father hissed, though his own face had turned completely pale and his hands were shaking. Mr. Pendleton cleared his throat and continued reading. To my grandson, Austin Vance. Austin straightened his tie, a confident, greedy grin spreading across his face. He eagerly leaned in, expecting the jackpot. I leave my vintage car collection, provided he pays off the outstanding maintenance debts on them. Furthermore, I leave him a trust fund consisting of $50,000 to be allocated only after he completes a mandatory financial responsibility course. What? Austin screamed, slamming both hands on the mahogany table as he stood up. $50,000? Are you kidding me? Grandpa promised me the downtown commercial properties. He told me I was going to take over the main real estate firm. This will is a fake. This is garbage. Sit down, Mr. Vance, Mr. Pendleton said, his voice dropping into a dangerously calm, authoritative tone. If you disrupt this reading one more time, I will have corporate security remove you from the premises immediately, and you will forfeit even the minor stipulations listed here. Austin glared at the attorney, his face turning a deep, angry shade of red, but he slowly sank back into his chair, breathing heavily. He shot a venomous look across the table at me, as if this was somehow my fault. My father leaned forward, sweat glistening his forehead. Arthur, please, this doesn't make any sense. If my wife, my son, and I are only receiving a tiny fraction of the estate, where is the rest of it going? Who gets the main holding company? Who gets the mansion, the land, and the primary liquid capital? Mr. Pendleton turned the page of the document. He looked directly at me, his eyes softening with genuine warmth, before looking back down at the paper. To my granddaughter, Chloe Vance, Mr. Pendleton read, his voice echoing with absolute clarity through the silent room. The only member of my family who ever loved me for who I was, and not for what was in my bank account. The only one who gave me her time, her laughter, and her genuine care without ever asking for a single dime in return. My parents and Austin froze, their expressions paralyzed in absolute shock. To Chloe, Mr. Pendleton continued, I leave the entirety of my primary estate. This includes the real estate holding company, the main historical mansion, and all surrounding land, all international investment portfolios, and all remaining liquid bank accounts, totaling an estimated value of $38 million. Chloe Vance is hereby declared the sole executor and primary heir of my entire legacy. The room completely exploded. No way! This is fraud, Austin roared, throwing his leather chair backward as he stood up, pointing a trembling finger at me. She manipulated him. She brainwashed an old, dying man. She probably forced him to sign this when he was out of his mind. My mother was hyperventilating, clutching her chest. $38 million. To her. The disappointment? The girl who works at a coffee shop. Robert, do something. This cannot be happening. My father stood up, his business facade completely shattered. He marched over to Mr. Pendleton, slamming his fist down on the desk. Arthur, I am his son. I demand to see the signature on that document. I will contest this in court. I will hire the best lawyers in the country and prove that my father was incompetent when he wrote this. Mr. Pendleton calmly spun his laptop around, facing my father and Austin. He pressed play on a video file. On the screen, a crystal-clear video began to play. It was recorded in Grandpa's study just 2 weeks before his stroke. Grandpa looked frail, but his eyes were incredibly sharp, alert, and full of life. He was sitting at his desk with Mr. Pendleton and 2 independent medical doctors standing beside him. My name is Richard Vance. Grandpa spoke clearly into the camera, a small knowing smile on his face. I am making this video to ensure that there is absolutely no confusion regarding my final wishes. I am fully aware that my son Robert, his wife Eleanor, and my grandson Austin are greed-driven vultures. They only look at me and see dollar signs. I know they will try to fight my will. Therefore, I have undergone 3 independent psychiatric evaluations this morning, all proving I am in perfect mental health. I am choosing to leave $38 million to my granddaughter Chloe. She is the future of my legacy. To the rest of my family, who will undoubtedly throw a tantrum upon hearing this, you reaped what you sowed. Goodbye. The video ended, cutting to a black screen. My father stumbled backward, looking like he had just been hit by a freight train. Austin slumped into his chair, his jaw hanging open, completely paralyzed by the realization that his grandfather had outsmarted them from beyond the grave. I sat at the end of the table, tears quietly rolling down my face, not because of the $38 million, but because Grandpa had protected me. Even when they walled me off from him, even when they treated me like garbage, Grandpa had seen everything. He knew their true nature, and he had delivered the ultimate justice. Mr. Pendleton closed the folder with a definitive thud. He looked at my family with cold disgust. The video, along with the certified medical evaluations, has already been logged with the state court. Any attempt to contest this will result in immediate dismissal, and under the no contest clause in paragraph 12, if you sue, you will instantly lose the minor inheritance you were granted today. My mother looked at me, her eyes suddenly shifting from rage to absolute desperation. She scrambled across the room, trying to grab my hands over the table. Chloe, sweetheart, please, we are your parents. We are a family. You know your father's business has been struggling lately. We need that capital. We can manage the company together. We can move back into the mansion as a family. Yeah, Chloe, Austin chimed in, his voice shaking, trying to sound forcedly polite. I'm your brother. We were just stressed out at the mansion because we were grieving. We didn't mean to push you. Let's work this out. I slowly stood up from my chair, pulling my hands away from my mother's grasp. I looked at the 3 people who had spent their entire lives making me feel worthless, the people who had physically assaulted me and blocked me from saying a final goodbye to my dying best friend. When I was crying at the gate in the pouring rain, begging for just 5 minutes to hold Grandpa's hand, you called corporate security on me, I said, my voice icy calm, echoing with a dangerous authority they had never heard from me before. You told me I was a dark cloud. You told me there was nothing in that house for me. I picked up my purse, looking down at them as if they were nothing but dust on the floor. You were right about one thing, Austin, I whispered, a cold smile touching my lips. There is absolutely nothing in that house for you anymore. Get your things out of my mansion by midnight tonight. If you or your fancy cars are still on my property by 12:01, I will have corporate security arrest you for trespassing. With that, I turned my back on my screaming, desperate family and walked out of the room, ready to claim the empire Grandpa had built for me. The walk out of that corporate building felt like taking my very first breath of fresh air. I could hear the muffled shouts of Austin and my mother fading behind the heavy glass doors of the conference room. They were trapped in a prison of their own greed, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one carrying their chains. I immediately drove straight to Grandpa's estate. When I reached the heavy wrought iron gates, the security guard on duty, the same one who had looked so uncomfortable when he turned me away days ago, instantly recognized my car. He opened the gates before I could even press the intercom. As I drove up the winding driveway, he stepped out of his booth, took off his hat, and gave me a respectful nod. Word travels fast in the corporate world. He already knew who the new boss was. I parked in front of the massive historical mansion. I walked up the marble steps, unlocked the front doors with the master's set of keys Mr. Pendleton had handed me, and stepped inside. The house was completely quiet, but it no longer felt cold or oppressive. It felt like Grandpa was still there, his presence lingering in the faint scent of old books and oak wood. At exactly 5 in the evening, the sound of screeched tires broke the silence outside. I walked over to the grand living room window and looked out. My parents' luxury sedan and Austin's bright yellow sports car had just pulled up. They stormed into the mansion, looking like a manic whirlwind. My mother was clutching empty cardboard boxes, her eyes red from crying, while Austin looked completely disheveled, his expensive tie undone. My father walked in behind them, staring at the floor, looking 10 years older than he had that morning. The moment Austin saw me standing at the top of the grand staircase, his anger flared up again. "Are you happy now, Chloe? You got what you wanted. You ruined us. You dragged our family name through the dirt in front of the city's entire business elite." "I didn't do anything, Austin," I said, my voice completely steady as I walked down the stairs. "One slow step at a time. Grandpa saw how you all treated him. He saw how you treated me. You did this to yourselves. Chloe, please, let's be rational," my father said, stepping forward, his voice completely stripped of its usual dominant authority. "Your mother and I built a life here. My business is facing a severe liquidity crisis. If you evict us from this estate and cut off our access to the Vance Holding credit lines, we will have to file for corporate bankruptcy within a month. Everything we own is tied up in your grandfather's sub-companies. We are your parents. You cannot do this to us." I stopped at the bottom of the stairs, looking my father dead in the eye. "When I begged you on this very spot to let me see Grandpa before he died, did you think about the fact that you were my father? When Austin threw me to the ground and you called security to lock me out in the rain, did you care about being a family?" My father opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He simply looked away, unable to face his own hypocrisy. "I am a woman of my word," I continued, pointing toward the front doors. "It is 5 o'clock. You have exactly 7 hours to pack your personal belongings, clothes, and documents. Anything left in this house at midnight becomes the property of the Vance estate, and I will have it thrown into the dumpster. Pack your boxes." For the next 6 hours, the mansion was filled with the frantic sounds of drawers opening, heavy boxes dragging across the floor, and bitter arguments between my parents and Austin, blaming each other for their downfall. I sat quietly in Grandpa's old study, reviewing the company financial documents Mr. Pendleton had sent over. It was worse than I thought. My father had been secretly dipping into Grandpa's corporate funds for over a year to cover up the massive losses in his own failing real estate firm. He hadn't just been waiting for Grandpa to die out of greed. He needed the inheritance to cover up his corporate fraud before Grandpa found out. But Grandpa already knew. That was why he had secured everything under my name, completely out of my father's reach. At 11:45 p.m., the house went quiet again. I walked out to the driveway. My parents and Austin were loading the last of their boxes into their cars. Austin slammed the trunk of his sports car, glaring at me with pure venom. "You think you're smart, Chloe? You're just a coffee shop girl. You don't know the first thing about running a multi-million-dollar real estate empire. You'll destroy the company within 6 months, and when you do, I'll be right there to buy it back for pennies." "I might have been just a coffee shop girl yesterday, Austin," I smiled calmly, crossing my arms against the cool night breeze. "But today, I am your landlord, and speaking of your sports car, Mr. Pendleton's team just informed me that the monthly lease on that vehicle is paid directly by the Vance Holding Company. Since your corporate access has been revoked, the lease is officially terminated." Austin's face went completely blank. "What?" Right on cue, a massive flatbed tow truck pulled up the driveway, its yellow hazard lights flashing in the darkness. 2 large men stepped out. "Are you Miss Chloe Vance?" the lead driver asked. "Yes, I am," I replied, handing him a set of corporate legal papers. "This yellow sports car belongs to the holding company. Please repossess it immediately." "No, you can't do this. This is my car," Austin screamed, rushing toward the driver. But my father held him back, knowing that fighting would only result in a police arrest. Austin watched in absolute humiliating silence as his prized possession, the ultimate symbol of his arrogant lifestyle, was hooked up to the chains and dragged onto the back of the tow truck. My mother burst into hysterical tears, hiding her face in her hands. My father looked at me one last time, a mixture of defeat and terror in his eyes, before getting into his sedan. They drove down the winding driveway, their taillights disappearing into the dark night, leaving the estate forever. I stood alone in the driveway as the heavy iron gates automatically slid shut behind them, locking them out of the kingdom they had tried so desperately to steal. The silence that followed was beautiful. I walked back inside the mansion and closed the heavy front doors. For 24 years, my family had made me feel like I was nothing. They walled me off, insulted me, and treated me like a ghost in my own home. But tonight, the ghosts were gone. I walked up to Grandpa's study, picked up a framed photograph of him and me smiling on the front porch, and held it close to my chest. "We did it, Grandpa," I whispered into the quiet room, a single tear of relief slipping down my cheek. "They're gone, and your legacy is safe." I was no longer the black sheep. I was the wolf who won. The following Monday, I officially walked through the glass doors of the Vance Real Estate Holding Company. I wasn't wearing my faded coffee shop uniform anymore. I was dressed in a sharp navy blue power suit, my hair pulled back and my grandfather's silver pocket watch safely tucked into my jacket. The moment I stepped into the top floor executive suite, the entire floor went completely silent. Over 50 corporate employees, project managers, and insincere executives were standing in a straight line, nervously clutching their clipboards. News of the dramatic showdown at the law office had spread like wildfire. They knew that the timid, forgotten daughter they had ignored for years was now the sole owner of the entire empire. Mr. Pendleton was already waiting for me at the door of the main boardroom. He gave me a proud smile. "Welcome to your new office, Miss Vance. The board of directors is assembled inside. They are eager to meet their new CEO." "Thank you, Arthur," I said, my voice projecting a calm confidence that surprised even myself. "Let's not keep them waiting." As I walked into the massive boardroom, all 12 board members instantly stood up, bowing their heads in respect. I took my seat at the absolute head of the table, the very chair my grandfather had sat in for over 40 years. "Before we begin reviewing the quarterly development reports," I said, looking around the table at the powerful men and women who used to scoff at my existence, "we have some urgent house cleaning to do. Arthur, please read the first corporate resolution." Mr. Pendleton stepped forward, opening a formal legal ledger. "By order of the majority shareholder, Chloe Vance, the subcompany known as Robert Vance Development, is hereby stripped of all corporate funding, credit lines, and structural association with the Vance Holding Company. Furthermore, a forensic audit has been launched into the illegal financial withdrawals made by Robert Vance over the last 12 months. A collective murmur went through the room, but nobody dared to object. They knew the law was entirely on my side. My father had used Grandpa's name to keep his failing business afloat, but that shield was officially gone. Without our funding, his company was nothing more than a hollow shell waiting to collapse. "And what about Austin Vance?" one of the senior board members asked cautiously. He was previously designated as the upcoming director of marketing. "Austin Vance has no official standing in this company," I replied coldly. "His corporate security badge has been deactivated, and if he attempts to enter any of our commercial properties, he is to be escorted out by the police. We only employ people who actually work, not people who live off entitlements." While the board meeting proceeded smoothly, my family's new reality was unraveling fast. Later that afternoon, Arthur handed me a legal notification. Deprived of the mansion, cut off from the corporate credit cards, and facing the sudden repossession of their luxury assets, my parents had been forced to move into a cramped, 2-bedroom rental apartment on the outskirts of the city. Austin, unable to accept his sudden downfall, had thrown a massive tantrum at a high-end local dealership when his personal accounts were frozen, resulting in a public scene that ended with him being detained by local authorities for disorderly conduct. The golden child had officially lost his glitter. That evening, as the sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow over the city skyline, I stood by the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of my new executive office. My phone on the desk buzzed. I picked it up. It was a call from an unlisted number. I pressed answer and placed it to my ear, remaining completely silent. "Chloe? Chloe, please don't hang up." My mother's voice cracked through the speaker. She sounded completely broken, sobbing hysterically. "You have to help us, sweetheart. The bank is threatening to foreclose on our personal savings accounts because of your father's business debts. Austin is sitting in a holding cell, and we don't even have the money to post his bail. We are living in a horrible place, Chloe. It's loud, it's dirty. We can't survive like this. Please, just give your father a position at the firm. just a minor management job with a steady salary. We are your flesh and blood." I listened to her desperate pleas, remembering every single time she had turned her back on me. I remembered the birthdays they celebrated without me, the holidays where I was left alone, and the brutal weight of Austin's hands when he threw me out into the rain while she watched with total indifference. "You talked a lot about family values when you were blocking me from saying goodbye to Grandpa," I said, my voice a freezing whisper that instantly silenced her sobbing on the other end. "But the truth is, Eleanor, you never cared about family. You only cared about leverage, and right now you have none. Chloe, please, have some mercy. We are your parents," she screamed into the phone. "My grandfather showed me mercy by teaching me the value of hard work, integrity, and respect," I replied, staring out at the empire that now belonged entirely to me. "You taught me how to be ruthless, so consider this a direct result of your own parenting. Do not call this number again." Without waiting for her reply, I pressed the end call button and blocked the number permanently. I walked over to my desk, picked up my grandfather's silver pocket watch, and wound it up, listening to its steady, unbroken tick. The wolves had tried to cage me, to wall me off from the light, and to steal the future that belonged to me. But they forgot that a wolf raised in the dark learns how to hunt in it. I sat down in my chair, opened the next real estate portfolio, and smiled. The black sheep was gone, the empire was mine, and the victory was absolute. 3 years passed, and the name Vance Holding Company was no longer just a local real estate firm. It had become a national powerhouse. I had taken Grandpa's foundation and expanded it, building affordable housing complexes and community centers across 3 different states. Every project we completed was dedicated to his memory. I stood on the manicured lawn of the Vance estate, looking up at the freshly painted facade of the historical mansion. It was a beautiful summer evening. The heavy wrought iron gate stood solid and quiet at the edge of the driveway. Arthur Pendleton walked up beside me, holding a final legal decree stamped by the federal court. He looked at me with a soft, proud smile. "It's officially over, Chloe," Arthur said, handing me the document. "The forensic audit into your father's old company has concluded. The court has seized their remaining hidden offshore accounts to pay back the embezzlement debts owed to the Vance estate. There is nothing left to investigate." "And where are they now, Arthur?" I asked, looking down at the legal stamp. "Your father failed completely after the bankruptcy, and he is currently living in a state-funded assisted care facility," Arthur replied, his voice flat. "Your mother works a minimum-wage retail job just to afford a tiny studio apartment downtown. And Austin, well, after losing his sports cars and his trust fund, he tried to run a series of fraudulent online schemes. He was arrested 6 months ago for wire fraud and is currently serving a 3-year sentence in a state penitentiary." I looked out at the golden horizon, watching the sun slowly dip below the tree line. I didn't feel a surge of joy, nor did I feel any pity. They had spent their entire lives treating people like stepping stones, entirely convinced that their greed made them untouchable. In the end, the world simply gave them exactly what they earned. "Thank you, Arthur," I said gently, "for everything." "Your grandfather knew exactly what he was doing when he left this empire to you, Chloe," Arthur said, tipping his hat before walking back toward his car. "You didn't just protect his legacy. You made it mean something." As Arthur's car drove down the winding path and the iron gates closed automatically, a deep, profound sense of peace settled over the estate. I walked inside the mansion and went straight to Grandpa's old study. The room remained exactly the same as he had left it: the oak desk, the leather chairs, and the shelves lined with classic literature. I walked over to the desk, pulled his silver pocket watch from my pocket, and placed it right next to a framed picture of the 2 of us. For years, I was the girl trapped in the rain, the one they walled off, the one they told would never amount to anything. They thought wealth was about the cars you drive, the clothes you wear, and the power you hold over others. But Grandpa taught me that true wealth is the strength of your character, the loyalty you show to the people who love you, and the resilience to stand tall when the storm hits. I touched the cold silver of the pocket watch one last time, feeling a quiet, unbroken connection to the man who had saved my life. The wolves had tried to destroy me, but they only succeeded in waking the leader of the pack. The shadows of my past were completely gone, replaced by a bright, limitless future. My name is Chloe Vance. I am the executor of an empire, the guardian of a legacy, and I am finally beautifully free.